Sexual violence survivors seeking justice on college and university campuses are instead finding themselves victimized a second time when they report their assault to school administration. That's what happened at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, according to 3 students, an alumna, and a former dean who have filed a formal complaint with the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights on behalf of themselves and 64 other assault survivors. The complaint alleges that the university responded to reports of sexual assault with hostility toward victims, failure to adequately respond to and investigate the claims, and hearing committees that were poorly trained to handle sexual assault cases. Joining our panel now from San Francisco, California are Andrea Pino, a current, and Annie Clark, a former student at UNC Chapel Hill. They're both survivors of sexual assault and are 2 of the women bringing the complaint against the university. Andrea and Annie, thank you for being with us.
Hi, thank you so much for having us here.
Thanks for inviting us.
So I really appreciate you guys coming forward, and obviously a lot of women are now coming and being a part of what you're doing. What do you hope to accomplish with your complaint?
So with our complaint, on a very basic level, we hope to hold certain administrators accountable at UNC and change policies and make sure, we have implemented best practices. But since coming forward, as you know, this has become much bigger than about a singular issue campaign. We've started to connect universities and notice trends and patterns that have happened, nationwide. If you look at Occidental College, you look at Yale, you start to notice the same things. And so what we're looking at is not only procedural change and holding administrators accountable, but having a larger conversation about sexual assault, exactly what Zerlina and Dawn, you were talking about, how we treat each other in this country. And so it's a much larger issue, and if you want to chime in on that.
And I think also it's definitely creating a forum for survivors to come forward. So oftentimes we're being told that our story is one of a kind. It's something that, it's our fault that we could have prevented. And we hope that, not only with our complaint, but also by coming forward and sharing our stories, that we let other survivors know that they're not alone, that it's not their fault, and that it's their time to come forward as well.
Well, starting with Andrea, can you just walk us through what the response was specifically from the university when you came forward with your complaint, when you initially came forward? How did they respond to you?
Yeah, so again, I was sexually assaulted in March 2012, so it's been about a year as of last week. And right after my assault, I had a very difficult time kind of adjusting, academically and just finding support. I had actually used Annie's blind report system, which allowed me to report anonymously because I didn't know who my assailant was. But since I was employed by the university and was a very active student leader, I noticed that our policies weren't very survivor-friendly, and they were also not very clear on what the procedures were for really coming forward and finding support. So, I was hearing dozens of stories a week, and I realized that my story was really one of many. So I was telling all these administrators, my concerns, and really wasn't being met with any sort of answers. It was very much, we'll get to it, it's something that will eventually meet compliance, but it was never, we're going to do something about it. Mm-hmm. Annie's a good friend of mine, and also, when she reported her assault, she dealt with the same issues in 2007. And, we realized that, these many years later, things weren't really changing. So, we decided to write, initially we were going to write an article. I'm a political science major. I was doing some research on Title IX, and I was writing an article with Annie. And when we found out we could file a complaint, talking to students at Amherst and Yale, we told the university we were going to do something about it, and then it was very much, well, you're not really going to do anything.
Right. They very much said, don't do it. We can handle this internally. Are you sure you want to go public with this? There was that, and I think just after years of fighting the same battle and seeing Andrea, go through what I went through and not, some has changed and some has definitely gotten better, but the thematic issues are still the same. Okay. And so we had to do something about it legally.
All right, well, I want to read a statement. The university did issue a statement saying, quote, "We will respond appropriately to the Office of Civil Rights request for information and cooperate fully with the investigation." So we want to make sure that we get that statement in. One more question to you, ladies. A former dean of students is actually joining you in the complaint. What was her experience, and why did she join the complaint with you?
I think she'll have to speak to some of that. I'm not going to speak on her behalf, but I can tell you, Melinda Manning has been an amazing and one of the few people at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill who has supported survivors and has fought, tirelessly from them. And I think after, years of doing that and not receiving much support, that it was enough. After I reported my assault in 2007 and was met with the now infamous football quote, I went to her and I was like, this has got to change. And she's one of the ones who helped me rewrite and recreate some of our policy.
All right. Well, I want to thank Andrea Pino and Annie Clark in San Francisco. We have a lot more from the panel, and I will let them get right to it after we come back from this quick break. Last week, one of my guests appeared on Fox News to debate the idea of arming women with guns as a solution to preventing rape. Here's a little bit of how that went.
But I don't think that we should be telling women anything. I think we should be telling men not to rape women and start the conversation there.
Well, criminals are not going to listen to that.
No,
so
but
I agree with you.
We're talking about it as if there's some faceless, nameless criminal, when a lot of times it's someone that you know and trust.
Well, I'm saying that women need to know that these situations arise, and evil exists in the world.
That was Sean Hannity, totally missing the point. And for her troubles, Zerlina was bombarded with racially charged rape and death threats on Twitter. Many so explicit we can't show them to you on television. All in response to her attempt to make this very simple statement of fact. Fewer women would be raped by men if fewer men raped women. We'd like to give her the chance to expound upon her point uninterrupted today. So, Zerlina, I want to give you a chance to try to make the point that you were attempting to make on Fox News. So if you could do that now.
Essentially, my point was, the premise of the segment is that give every woman a gun, that's rape prevention. And I'm saying, hey, that doesn't seem like a good idea. I mean, it's not effective. People are raped by someone that they know. 80% of women are raped by someone that they know. So you're not going to be on a date with the gun out on the table, just in case you wanted to do something, I'm ready for you. That's just not how social interactions happen. And so my point is that maybe we should be looking at who is committing the rapes and why and what conditioning they've had throughout their lives. And maybe we can start prevention by preventing the situation at all from happening. So then you don't even need the gun.
Right. So you're you're talking about socializing men, and you went in on Emily.com. You wrote about 5 points that we could promote to teach and educate men about sexual assault. And I just want to go through them really quick. You said teach young men about legal consent. Teach young men to see women's humanity. Teach young men to express healthy masculinity. Teach young men to believe women and girls who come forward, and teach males about bystander intervention. And it seems to me that, a young man going into college ought to already have that acculturation at home. But if he's not getting it, maybe a little reinforcement of that in the college atmosphere would be helpful in preventing these crimes.
And, one of the groups I cited in the interview was Men Can Stop Rape. And I sat in on one of their workshops. It was a bystander intervention workshop last winter. And one of the things I left with was this needs to be part of basic sex education because we need to know what consent is. It's not that men don't know that rape is wrong. It's that a lot of them don't know how to identify what rape is. And I think that, many of the bystanders in Steubenville, for example, saw something happening and they didn't understand that what they were seeing was rape. Right. And I think that maybe they would have been more willing to intervene, and that's where the bystander intervention comes in. If you know what you're seeing is rape, then maybe you're going to say, maybe we should get this girl a cab. We should get her away from these guys. Even if you don't know her, I think it's just it's a responsibility on people to intervene, to make sure something bad is not going to happen.
To protect a friend. I mean, and that was one of the aspects in the case, Don, that the young woman actually was texting to some of her friends, if that was happening to me, why didn't you do something about it? And I think, you played football. You understand sort of the culture that's around young men who are athletic. Isn't part of the problem here that young men aren't being acculturated this way? They're not being taught to sort of respect women's humanity. They're being taught you're Superman. You can do whatever you want. Anything you do in this group of other young men who are athletic and who are the stars in this campus, anything you do is okay.
I think it goes far beyond just the culture of athletics and the culture of, in this case, of a football team. It is the culture of masculinity. It is the culture of men that, to Zerlina's point, we are raised in a culture that says that women and girls are less than. That's the whole charge of what I talk about when the charge between guys is you throw like a girl or you run like a girl. Seems like an innocent statement that we hear at a very early age, but it does two things. One, it creates a sense of masculinity that is a very narrow understanding of masculinity, to your point about this broader sense of what it means to be a man. But the second thing, it says that women and girls are less than. And whether it's in the culture of sports or in a lot of other cultures where women are ornamental. I was just coming in here, saw the Sports Illustrated swimsuit ad, right? Women are ornamental to men's experiences as men, as a group. And so that's part of the rape culture that says women as objectified sexual objects, ornamental to men's experience together. And I think whether it's sports or any other kind of environment where men gather, and in this case, these are boys. Right. These are high school boys. These aren't men. These are high school boys who learn.
College.
No, these are high school boys. These are high school boys who learned from a culture around them that women are ornamental, and that we have this very voyeuristic way in which we experience our early lessons around sexuality. And so that they're taking in all this from media that is very humiliating in a large sense. When you look at how boys experience their first understanding of intimacy, sexual behavior, and sexual interaction, it is not loving and caring and nurturing. It's not those broader lessons of humanity. That's the question we should be asking here is, where's the humanity of these boys who said, there's another human being? Right. When is my responsibility as a human being to look after my fellow human being?
Right. And I mean, and Michael, you talk a lot about sort of the culture that surrounds particularly young black boys as they're coming up and sort of being the sort of universal suspect, right, and having to carry that burden even as young as in high school. But now you have this other layer on it, right? You also have athletic boys who are sort of heroized and lionized and given permission to do things that otherwise would be considered criminal. I mean, it took other boys to tell one of the two accusers here, hey, man, you're a felon. But that was only one. A lot of other people just shared these images and thought that they were humorous.
Sure. I think that I played football when I was in high school. I was not nearly as good as Don was, but I tried my best to throw the football as far as I could. But I played football, and I saw a lot of this culture just in the locker room. And I think for me, what's deeply troubling about this case is the focus, again, as Erlina is pointing out, is how do women avoid rape? And the conversation should be, how do men not rape? So we have these conversations with our girls about, what you should wear, or how you should walk home at night, or what you should do. But we never have conversations with our boys about how not to treat a woman with disrespect, how not to take advantage of a girl who might be intoxicated, how not to do things that we should not be doing as young men. And that conversation, as Zelina pointed out, should be the focus as we move forward. So rape is not 1 in 5, but 0 in 5.
Yes.
And by the way, that point of we tell women what not to do is exactly why they become, it's your responsibility, right? And that's why they get blamed, because haven't we told you all these things? It's your fault. You didn't do these things. You didn't carry your gun to the party, right? I mean, you didn't do these things. It was your fault that this happened.
Okay, I'm gonna let you guys make those points after the break. Some of the nation's most elite universities are they participating in the cover-up of sexual assaults on campus? More of this debate and that debate coming up next. We're back talking about the high school sexual assault trial now underway in Steubenville, Ohio. And I'm going to bring our panel back in. Inevitably, what happens in a case like this, where you have a football program that's so dear to the community. I mean, I lived in Miami, where basically football was one and then maybe God second, right? And then, there are towns where this is important, is that you have a certain percentage of the community that actually close ranks around the boys. Mm-hmm. And the girl ends up sort of isolated among other women activists, obviously all over the country, but there is a closing ranks. So is the risk here in Steubenville that you're going to wind up having families closing ranks around these vulnerable families who are worried about civil lawsuits and everything else, and worried about the future of these boys? If they're convicted, they would be locked up till they're 21. The closing ranks aspects of this case, and I'll start with you, Erin.
I would say certainly within a community that is a depressed community and doesn't have a lot of hope is being put into the football program. But I would also say that a lot of the media coverage that should know better, that is national, does also end up closing ranks and worrying so much about these boys' dreams. We saw it in the coverage of the Texas gang rape. 2020's report, frankly, I found very victim blaming, very concerned about these boys, where in this case we have a lot of evidence. So I think it is absolutely true that institutionally people close ranks, but I also think in our broader culture we have anything but thinking about the victim. We have, what about those poor boys? And that definitely has to change.
And certainly, isn't this getting back to what you were talking about? Because even at the back of people's minds, when they're thinking about this case, at the back of their minds, it's like the Mike Tyson rape case. They're thinking, well, she went to that party. Right. She was drinking. Right. She had to have had something to do with it, right?
And the thing here is that Trent and Malik were making choices also, right? And so that needs to be the focus of all of these cases. I mean, the end of their football career is not as important as really the tragedy and the trauma that this victim is going to have to overcome. And that should be the focus, right? We need to talk about what the choices that the boys made, not the choices that she made, and put herself in that situation, to quote one of the coaches that was quoted in the media.
Right, especially since part of the choices that are being made by not just these boys, but you're seeing that with fights being posted on YouTube. You're seeing it with this whole culture of abusing someone in some way and then turning it into entertainment.
Certainly, and I also want to point out that this story was being swept under the rug, and it was not going to be talked about. And to give a shout out to Anonymous, I know they were quite controversial, but without them, this story would not be talked about at all. So they were the ones who brought this to the national attention. I think, look, it's a sad statement of our country, of our culture, of our love of sports, that we would put any football program before the humanity of a child, of a young woman. That we put the future of two men who potentially raped a young girl as holding them and helping them and saving them, and looking at this young girl as the one who possibly asked for it or was too drunk. That is a sad comment on our humanity as a nation, and as a country. We should be surrounding this girl with warmth and with love.
Right, and even just the way we talk about the case. I mean, I think we talk about assault, we talk about sort of always getting around the R word and not really even wanting to address it. And isn't that part of the reason that boys don't understand the 5 points that Zerlina was saying? Because rape is just not even on the menu of things that they're thinking about. They're thinking about fun, they're thinking about partying, obviously they're thinking about sex. But boys are not being trained to even think about or to, ruminate about the notion of rape.
Not at all. Boys aren't even being socialized to even talk about being human. They're just talking about humanity, right? It's a very narrow understanding and a very narrow definition. And I think that's one of the broader problems is you started the show off by saying parents, this may be too sensitive for your children. The problem is their children are being exposed to this kind of humiliating behavior on a regular basis through media that they consume in the absence of parents. And then we say when it becomes a much more mature or dangerous behavior later on, we say that this is a women's issue. And therefore, it's women's responsibility to deal with this and not men's responsibility for us to talk to our sons about what it means not to do these things, if you will. But even beyond not to rape, not to assault, but how to love each other, how to really truly care for each other in a society where we are accountable to one another. That's not happening with our boys, and they are taking in from a media culture of humiliation, of this is what it means to be a man. And it's not just in sports or in these areas, but I think it's across the board of how we talk to one another, where we don't listen to each other, we don't talk to each other, and we don't see that your issue is my issue.
Right. And then we're also sending these boys who are already being acculturated this way in high school, then we're sending them off unsupervised to college. And just to read a couple of statistics, once these children get to college, and we just had those two young women on from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, in colleges, college women, 19% have reported experiencing sexual assault. That's 1 in 5. And 42% tell no one about the assault. We're looking at a 2008 survey found that 1 in 6 female undergraduates reported non-consensual vaginal penetration, rape, essentially. And what we're talking about is boys who were already by high school being taught, you know what, I can kind of do whatever I want. These girls are just objects, they're just accessories to me. What frightens me as a parent is then we're sending our girls off to college with these same boys who really haven't learned anything about women, respecting women, or rape. Okay, there's really just so much more for us to get to on this issue. We're going to have to switch gears next. I want to thank Don McPherson and also Erin Carmone. Zerlina and Michael are staying for more. And up next, my letter of the week. Reince Priebus, please allow Nerdland to be the next stop on your listening tour. This morning, my question: does the selection of a new pope present a chance for institutional change? Plus, another installment of This Week in Voter Suppression. And babies being shot and police under fire. How to walk the fine line when protecting our streets. But first, the rape case igniting a national conversation and turning one small town upside down. Good morning, I'm Joy Reid, filling in for Melissa Harris Perry. A note of caution for parents watching this morning. We're getting started with a very sensitive story, so you may want to send children out of the room. This week, 2 high school football stars from Steubenville, Ohio, went on trial after being accused of raping a 16-year-old girl from just across the Ohio River in nearby West Virginia. Now, a crime and justice story in a small town like Steubenville isn't usually the makings of national news. And the alleged events on the night in question, sadly, aren't remarkable for their rarity. Because we know that 1 in 6 American women is a survivor of an attempted or completed sexual assault. And we know that 44% of sexual assault and rape survivors are under the age of 18. But thanks to an unusual aspect of this case, we also all know now in graphic detail some of what happened in Steubenville on the night of August 11, 2012. We know because the defendants and witnesses to the alleged crime documented their actions on social media. And although the trial just began on Wednesday, this case has already been tried in the court of public opinion, with posts to Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube standing in as evidence. The intrusion of social media into the criminal justice system is just one of the many complications swirling around Steubenville. There's also the supremacy of football in a struggling town where the high school team is a shining light and where its players are hailed as heroes. Both the county prosecutor and a juvenile crimes judge recused themselves from the case because of ties to the team. And then there's the question of consent, whether an incapacitated girl still maintains the capacity to be a willing participant in a sex act. The case's digital footprint was amplified to national prominence by a crime blogger who collected and posted the tweets and this Instagram photo of the defendants holding the accuser on the night of the alleged assault. A December New York Times article on the unfolding case caught the attention of hacker Collective Anonymous, which unearthed this 12-minute YouTube video of a former Steubenville High School baseball player joking about the incident.
She's deader than a doornail.
Now, that student wasn't even at the party and later apologized. According to police accounts, after a night of heavy drinking, the accuser woke up with no recollection of what had happened to her the night before. Her parents told the authorities that she found out the next day the same way as the rest of us, by reading about it on Twitter. She filled in the details when she read a story in the local newspaper later that day. On the morning of August 14, her parents took a flash drive loaded with the tweets, the Instagram photo, and the YouTube video to police. A week later, 17-year-old Trent Mays, a star quarterback on Steubenville High School's Big Red football team, and the team's standout receiver, 16-year-old Malik Richmond, were arrested and charged with rape and kidnapping. The kidnapping charges were later dropped. At an October pretrial hearing, one witness testified that he videotaped Mays assaulting the alleged victim in the backseat of a car while en route between parties. But the witness says he deleted the video from his phone. Another testified to seeing Richmond assault her in a home basement later that night while she was naked and unmoving on the floor. And this, the condition of the accuser, not the tweets or the photos or the video, was the main question before Judge Thomas Lips in the Jefferson County Juvenile Court this week. Now, under Ohio law, an offender is guilty of rape if an alleged victim's inability to resist or consent is substantially impaired. Attorneys for the defense plan to argue implied consent on the grounds that the accuser willingly drank and accompanied the boys, and because, quote, she didn't affirmatively say no. The judge will have to weigh that against the prosecution's argument, outlined this week in opening statements, that an unconscious girl is incapable of affirmatively consenting to anything. With me today at the table are Zerlina Maxwell, a political analyst and a contributor to thegrio.com, Michael Skolnick, the political director to hip-hop pioneer Russell Simmons and the co-president of globalgrind.com, former NFL and college football player Don McPherson, who is now president of Don McPherson Enterprises, and Erin Carmon, a journalist and commentator who's now a staff writer at Salon.com. But first, I want to go to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where we're joined by prosecutor Stacey Onowitz. She is the supervisor of the Sex Crimes and Child Abuse Unit of Florida's State Attorney's Office. Stacey, thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, Stacey, we've learned that the accuser will potentially testify in this case, maybe even as early as tomorrow. First of all, how difficult is it as a prosecutor to put an accuser on the stand? This is obviously one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult moment of her life, and the sensitivities involved are clear. Just walk us through how you prepare an accuser to get on the stand and confront her accusers in this way.
Well, you're 100% right. This is going to be a monumental day, and it's a very difficult day for most rape victims, and that's why we hear that a lot of rape victims don't ever want to come forward, because they have to take the stand, and all of their history with regard to the sexual event that took place that night is going to be known. And so as a prosecutor, a sex crimes prosecutor, you not only act as the attorney, you act as the psychologist and the therapist and the cheerleader in order to get them to come to court. So what happens is that person has to be mentally prepared to be able to talk to a jury of people made up in the community and tell them about what happened. And in this case, it's really made difficult because she does not remember what happened. All of the events that she learned about came through social media. So the bottom line is she has to take the stand, and she does have to tell the jury, in this case it's the judge because it's a juvenile case, that she was drinking, what happened, and that she doesn't really remember what happened after that.
Right.
So while it is difficult, it is something that has to be done in order for victims to come forward and to be able to show that they need to take a stand.
Right. And Stacey, it's made even more difficult because obviously part of the issue when somebody is a victim of sexual assault, is a victim of rape, is the humiliation of just having to talk about what happened to you. In this case, that humiliation is compounded by the fact that there are pictures, that there was social media sharing of images and video, that she was already, in a sense, publicly humiliated, and now she has to walk through all that again. And so can you tell us a little bit about how social media has changed sort of the construct of cases like this?
Well, listen, you know, before we had social media and Instagram and Twitter, the victims would take the stand, and they still do. The victim of a sexual assault would take the stand and would have to explain to the jury about what happened that night. And if they remembered what happened, then they had to talk about the sexual acts that took place, and that can be very difficult, as you can imagine. In this case, she didn't know what happened. She found out like everybody else. To have to come into court and to have to identify yourself. That is me in the photograph. That is me passed out. That is me not knowing what happened. It is humiliating, but it's something that has to be done. You cannot try these cases without having a victim. So she has to really mentally prepare. The attorney has to prepare her that it's one day, and it's one day that hopefully is going to get her justice. So they know when they walk into court, they know what's going to happen. A prosecutor will prepare a person to know that they're going to try to besmudge your reputation. That's what happens in rape cases. They want to be able to say, you consented, you knew what you were doing, you actively participated, you voluntarily drank. So they have to be mentally prepared to be able to answer those tough questions. Why, when, and how.
Right, and and I want to get a little bit into that, Stacey, because obviously what the defense has to do here is they have to essentially paint a picture of a girl who consented, a girl who essentially was drinking. As you said, they have to go after her character. What is the line between somebody who admits to being at least partially impaired, admits to having had something to drink, had some alcohol? What's the line for consent, the legal line that has to be drawn, whether or not she consented?
Well, here's the situation. I mean, certainly if someone takes the stand and says, I did not drink, I didn't take any drugs, I don't know how I got in that condition, their credibility is at stake. No one's going to believe that. In this case, you have to be able to say, yes, I ingested alcohol, I passed out, I did not consent to anything. How could I consent voluntarily and intelligently and make that decision when I'm in that incapacitated state? And based on the photographs, the tweets, some of the text messages, it was obvious to everybody in that vicinity that she was not capable of intelligently and voluntarily saying, I want to actively participate in a sex act. And that's what you're going to see when all these social media facets come into the case.
Okay, I want to say thank you very much to Stacey Onowitz in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I want to turn now to the panel in studio because we merely want to talk about some of the broader implications of this case. This case is so packed with implications. Not just the nightmare that it is for every parent sending a kid to college, the nightmare for every girl who's taking those first steps out on her own, and it's not even the nightmare of the stranger in the dark. These are people that you know. This is taking place on a college campus. I do want to start with Zerlina because you are a survivor of sexual assault. You obviously can most put yourself sort of in the place of this young woman. What are the disincentives to come forward? Isn't this obvious that the humiliation, the fact that you have to talk about it publicly, do the disincentives cause most women just to not bother?
I think so. I think there's a very high level of fear of not being believed, of being blamed. I think the defense here is implementing a victim blaming strategy. I called it victim blaming 101. And that's the reason why women don't come forward because, too many people question, well, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And instead, they should be looking at what the boys did and the focus should be on them and why did they take this girl who seemed to be impaired around with them from party to party. So the questions are just on the wrong person in the case.
Right. And, I want to talk a little bit to Irene because you've written about rape in the age of social media. And I think that what's compounded here, and I guess I'm fixated on this idea that before she even got a chance to come forward, before she even made her own affirmative decision to tell her story was already out there. And it was basically being used as a joke. Like these guys actually thought it was funny to put these pictures out. How does social media complicate and in a sense, does it encourage almost the behavior that we're seeing from some of these guys?
Well, it tells you a lot about the mindset that these people around her had, that they thought that it was something that they could take a picture of as a spectacle, as opposed to something that they wanted to intervene in. And I think this goes both ways, because on the one hand, there's a re-traumatization of the victim. There have been several cases, including the tragic case of the 11-year-old gang raped in Texas, Savannah Dietrich, who broke a restraining order by tweeting. She found out about her assault as well from a video and from images. A lot of these blackout situations, unfortunately, they learn the details, but the flip side is, as much as that is an incredible violation and the creation of non-consensual pornography, you might call it, from this violation, at the same time they function as evidence. So of course feminists have been talking for years about rape culture, but it's this idea of, people don't believe it exists. And just look at those images and look at the impunity that was implied by people creating those images. Here is evidence in a legal sense and in a cultural sense.
Right, and I definitely want to talk more about that. And we do want to let we're going to let you guys actually weigh in on this as well. But when we come back, there's so much more to talk about. So stay with us. And when we come back, Zerlina is going to talk to us about how talking about a story, in the process of that, she became the story. More about that after the break.